Okay, so last time we got together, we spoke about night photography. And as you know, night photography requires a specific set of settings, as you found out. And that's done mostly with low shutter speed. Low shutter speed that requires you to be on a tripod, okay? Obviously, to try to shoot handheld. So does anybody have any questions about last week? At all, anything? Go ahead.
Just a quick question.
Uh-huh.
So for the night photography, I understand it's a night photography, but when the sun's kind of like almost sitting down, it's not totally sitting down, you can still do this.
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's called the golden hour. That's the best time. It's from the time when the sun goes down and the time it gets dark. That's about a 20-minute window. And that's really the best time you can get some really good night photography. It's still going to require you to shoot a low shutter speed, and it's still going to require you to do pretty much the techniques that we learned last week, which means, tripod, maybe a cable release, that kind of a thing. But that is the best time. You're going to get the best sunsets and also the best night photography. You can still get the photography that's going to allow you to get the starburst and everything that you saw last week. So yeah, that works out good. So what I suggest you do is every day look at your almanac or whatever, or even on your phone, and find out what time sunset is. Okay? So be ready, be set up before sunset strikes. And once it's official sunset, then you've got about a 20-minute window before it gets dark. Okay? And that's called the golden hour. And it's a really beautiful time to do it.
Now, would that be like sunset from a sunset table? Now that's like when the sun, or might it vary depending on the topography?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of variables that go into play, of course, but that's kind of a table to go by, kind of a rule, I guess you can kind of go by, to try to do that. But yeah, it works out really well. I like to do that. You are gonna, because you're using low shutter speed, you're letting in a lot of ambient light, your shot's gonna look a lot lighter than you see it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the only thing. I did the same thing at the Huntington Beach Pier one day, and I was like, wow, why is it so light? And then I realized because the lower the shutter speed, the more light it's hitting the sensor, and it's gonna really brighten up the scene, okay? So just be aware of that. So it's not gonna come out really, really dark, but you will be able to get the starburst and all that other stuff.
You get also like a low ISO on it, right?
Yes, always keep your ISO as low as possible. Usually around 100, no more than 200. Okay, so since we're good about last week, we're going to move on to this week's topic. This week's topic deals with totally the opposite spectrum, okay? We talked about low shutter speed being the primary for night photography. Now we're going to talk about action, sports photography, which the opposite, that requires a fast shutter speed. And that's going to be what you're going to need to freeze the action, okay? So, but before we do that, I want to show you guys a video, and then after the video, we're going to go ahead and talk about what the video says, and I'm going to give you my spiel on sports. Sports photography is really something dear to my heart because I really enjoy it. If I had my choice of any genre of photography, that would be the one that I would do because I'm a big sports nut to begin with, and why not combine that with my photography passion? That way I can go ahead and do both at the same time. So let's go ahead and watch the video, and then we'll get back to that. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, that video kind of got into more of the technicalities of the camera itself, and that's not really what I want to talk about. We'll talk about the actual art of the act of shooting and what you need to do. Okay, there's a couple of things that come into play when you're doing night photography. Sports photography, sports, action, wildlife, basically anything that moves really fast. Your grandkid playing soccer, that you want to freeze the action. That's what it's all about. So you don't necessarily have to call it sports photography. You can basically call it action photography. Okay, as I put under action as well. So basically, the main thing is going to be about shutter speed, okay? You know how sometimes I suggest you guys shoot an aperture priority, right? When you're doing portraits or other things that require when you have things that are moving very fast or whatever, and you can control your aperture that way. Well, this is gonna be the opposite. We're gonna concentrate on controlling your shutter speed. When I'm shooting sports, I like to shoot my sports anywhere around 2,000, right around 2,000, my shutter speed. So basically you see it like this, 1 to 2,000. And to put that in perspective, you remember that the shutter speed, the recommended shutter speed or the native shutter speed that comes out of the factory is 125, correct? 1/25 of a second. So as you increase your shutter speed, you're able to freeze the action, 1,000. So I always told you guys that I suggest the minimum shutter speed for freezing action, the minimum shutter speed for sports should be 1 to 500. Okay, 500 should be sufficient to freeze most action. However, if I'm doing like really fast action, I like to be about 2,000. But that should still be your preference based on what you want to capture, okay? But the minimum should always be 500. Some people say 250, 250. I say 500. Okay, but again, once you determine what you want to do and what you're doing, and once you get your own expertise, you can pretty much set up your own guide, what you want to do, okay?
Question about the notation. Those look like fractions. Are they?
They're 1 second. So 125th of a second. So this is basically a second.
Okay.
That's how fast you're shooting. Obviously, the faster the number goes up, the faster what happens is this.
Okay.
Your camera has a sensor,
Okay.
okay? The sensor has like a curtain that opens and closes, okay? But just think of it as a curtain. When the curtain opens and closes, that captures the image, correct?
Sure.
When you have a low shutter speed, for example, let's say a 30th of a second, okay? That's gonna open up and then close really slow, okay? As you increase your shutter speed, you'll hear it. You can actually literally hear it open and close really fast. And the faster it closes, the more action that it's gonna capture. The faster it's gonna capture the image, okay? Most cameras can go all the way up to 8,000,
Goodness.
okay? Obviously, you don't need to go that high. Okay, so 125 is the minimum, the suggested shutter speed, or the native. You can go as low as 60 to be handheld, but this should be the minimum for sports photography, for action photography. But I suggest anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 to actually capture movement. Okay, for example, I like to watch. I'm a baseball nut. I love to shoot baseball. Okay, so let's say that I'm focusing on the pitcher. Okay, the pitcher will starts his delivery right about here. He comes up. I'll start shooting when he's about here, and continue shooting as he goes through his motion until he releases the ball. Out of those, depending on my shutter speed, I'm going to get some pretty good shots. Okay.
Okay.
Same thing with the batter. The batter's here. I've been doing this long enough to know how to time a batter. I will watch a batter. I don't care what's going on or anywhere else, but I'm watching the batter. And as soon as he starts to go back and come forward, I'll start shooting. And as he goes through his batting motion, I will actually capture the ball coming off the bat. Okay, and I have a lot of different examples to show you of that. Okay, so
you're shooting the camera kind of like an automatic weapon?
Exactly. So I'm going to show you your camera sensor. Like I said, opens and closes depending on the shutter speed that you have set. Okay, so I want you to listen to the shutter opening and closing. Okay, and just think of it, like I said, think of it as a curtain that opens and closes, and it's going to be based how fast or slow it opens and closes. It's going to be based on the shutter speed that you set. Correct? So right now we have it at the native 500, and that's about right. That's the recommended one. You see here, that's how fast it open and close. Okay. Now as I'm going to lower it to 60. Okay, and then you'll see it's still okay, It's still good enough to do a handheld shot, but it's starting to slow down. So I'm gonna cut that in half to 30. You'll see it. Now listen, you'll hit the shutter open, and then you'll hit the shutter close, okay? It's still okay, but it's starting to slow down, correct? Let's cut that down to 10. You hear it?
I think so.
Look. It's starting to slow down. It's what they call dragging the shutter. That means the shutter is dragging. It's not really going, okay? So now I'm gonna go, so you can really see this, okay? I'm gonna go to 2 seconds, okay? Now listen for when the shutter opens, and then listen to when the shutter closes, okay? Now it's open, and now it's closed. You hear that?
Yeah.
That's how much it's staying open. Now I'm gonna go to 10 seconds. So once again, this is at 10 seconds, okay? You're gonna go, and this is kind of what you do when you do night photography, right about 10 seconds. So you'll hear a shutter open. It's open now, it's recording. There it is. So that is your shutter firing at 10 seconds. Very, very low shutter speed that you cannot possibly get a handheld shot off. Requires a tripod, okay? Now as we go back up, you'll see it start getting faster and faster. 125, 500, and then I'm gonna go to 2000, which is where I like to do mine, okay? You'll see it really fast. See that? Faster. Now, we're talking about earlier about capturing action, for example, the pitcher or the batter, right? So how do I do that? Am I just taking one shot, or how am I capturing all those shots? I normally capture about 12 shots between here and there. How can I do that? Well, these cameras, especially the high-end cameras, have a really fast shutter, okay? So what I do is I set the camera. This camera here shoots 12 frames per second. That means as long as I hold the shutter button down, it's going to continuously fire the shutter and capture the action. And that is really the best way to capture motion, okay? So what I do is I set my camera to, instead of one shot, I'm gonna set it to AI servo, he was talking about in the video, okay? And then I'm going to do is I'm going to set it for multiple frames per second. Instead of one shot, instead of a single frame, I want the camera to fire multiple frames, okay? Now you're gonna hear, pay attention how fast this is, okay? So let's say I'm shooting over here, right? And you'll see how fast this is. It's like a machine gun, okay? So now I'm gonna shoot, I'm waiting for the pitcher to start his delivery. Once the pitcher starts the delivery, I will already be on him, and then I will hold the shutter button, make sure that I'm focused already on him. As he starts his his delivery, I will hit.
Goodness.
Okay? That's how fast this camera is. That means the entire time that he's delivering the ball or hitting the ball, he's shooting. I guarantee you that I'm gonna probably get 3 or 4 or 5 very good shots out of that. Okay? That's how that works. Multiple frames per second. Because if you do it the other way, you're only gonna capture one shot. And you might get lucky. I got lucky one time and actually captured a record-breaking ball coming off a bat. Okay? And it was only a one shot. It just got lucky. I mean, you can literally see the ball coming off the bat. And I had my mirrorless camera that I had just purchased. I didn't really know how to set the settings yet on that thing. So I was able to just give one shot. I was lucky and actually captured the record-breaking shot. So you just never know. Good thing about this digital, if you set it for multiple frames per second, you can always delete the ones that you don't need later on, right? So it doesn't. So if you're following, for example, you're following a kid or whatever that's running with the ball, you're just gonna kind of stay on them and just keep on shooting, okay? And you keep the ones that you that you like, and you discard the ones that you don't want, you know? So that's the beauty of having it. Now, not all cameras are gonna shoot 12 frames per second. Some will do 8, some will do 5, whatever. So it'll just be a little bit slower. But just remember that it'll continue shooting as long as you hold the shutter button. So your question was, can you set it to how many frames? No, you do that yourself by holding the button. So if you want to just do a couple of you, just let it go. If you want to keep shooting, just keep holding it. Okay, it'll just keep buffering. That's another one of the reasons that I told you guys in the past that you have to have a card that writes really, really fast. Okay, because if you have a slow media card, the camera's gonna buffer, and it's not because it's gonna take a while for the image to get read onto the card. Okay, so if you're gonna be doing sports photography or action photography, I suggest you purchase a card that has at least an 800x write speed. Okay, and you'll see. Yeah.
So the cars have speeds as
Yes.
well?
Yes, we talked about that in the past. So if you look at my card, for example, you'll see this is a Lexa professional card, and you'll see the 800X right here. That means this card is capable of capturing really fast motion. There's some more and there's some less. But if you buy a card, if you're just gonna be doing portraits, for example, for people who don't move very fast, then you don't need to do that. You don't need to be.
So are you always interchanging your cards then?
No, I just have a fast card all the time. It doesn't matter if I do fast or slow. There's some that are 1600X, you know, and this actually getting I need to get some new ones because my cards are all getting pretty old. So it's good to replace them every once in a while because they will eventually fail on you. But so it's good to have cards that are able to write to accept the information really fast, I should say. Because the camera is trying to write the information to the card, but if the card is very slow, it's not gonna,
Capture it.
it won't capture it. It will, but it's gonna buffer. That means your camera is not gonna, it's gonna start slowing down on you, okay? But as you can see, mine's shooting really fast, so that's why I'm able to do all that. Speed, and we're good with,
So you always use 2000, is there another situation where you use less or more?
you can use less or more. I don't really, to me, it's over, you can use 1,000, you can use even 500, you know, that's just my personal preference. That's where it works for me, because I do a lot of really fast stuff, but you can do even less. What you do is just trial and error, right? You should, if the goal is to capture movement, capture the action. So if you're taking a shot and you're getting a little bit of blurriness, then you're not freezing the action, right? So you just put it up. So you put up the shutter speed until you're freezing it, okay?
And do you need a tripod for that?
No, not at all, because you're shooting fast. And most of that is done during the day. Where it becomes challenging is when you're shooting, when you're trying to get the shutter speed up, and it's nighttime. For example, if you're shooting in a state, I shot a game one time, at the Sun Bowl between Oklahoma and UTEP.
So
Football. Yeah, the Oklahoma Sooners. I was lucky. I was able to secure a press pass, and I had a hard time because that stadium, the Sun Bowl, doesn't have very good lighting. I didn't think it did anyway. So in order for me to get the shutter speed up high like that, I had to get my ISO up pretty high, and so some of the images had a little bit of grain in them. Because you have to. Sports photography obviously works better in the daytime when there's plenty of sun. But sometimes you'll get challenged. Where I've had challenges is if I'm shooting inside a gymnasium, for example, basketball games, volleyball games, things like that, because you're trying to get the shutter speed up, but you have to compensate by putting up your ISO to get that in.
Putting up the what?
Huh?
Compensate by putting up the what?
Your ISO.
ISO.
Your ISO. You have to get your ISO. See, this is where it gets a little tricky. Obviously, if we're shooting sports, what are we shooting with? We're shooting with a really long focal length, right? Because you want to get close to the action. So, not only that, but you really want to get really true sports photography where you get a really good bokeh, where you really blow out the background. Those are the ones, if you ever look at ESPN photography or ESPN photos of sports, you'll see a very sharp image, but the background is all blown out, correct?
Yeah.
And one of the primary reasons for that, two things actually, is they're usually shooting with those big lenses that open up very wide. Okay, most of them are 2.8, if not more. Okay, so now those big fat lenses you see sports photographers shoot with, they're usually 300 millimeters at 2.8. Okay, so they're shooting 200. I'm sorry, they're shooting at 300 millimeters with their aperture set around 2.8. Those are what makes those beautiful, beautiful shots. And they're also consequently happen to have a really big, really high shutter speed. And here's where it gets a little tricky. Anytime that you are shooting with a long focal length, okay, you have to make sure that your shutter speed is at least equal or greater than your shutter speed. I'm sorry, that your shutter speed is equal or greater than your focal length. So that means if you're shooting with a 300, right, millimeter lens, that means that your shutter speed has to be over 300, right? In order to be able to shoot handheld. And that's okay, it's easier to do if you're shooting outdoors and there's plenty of light. But if you're trying to get 300 millimeter indoors, in a gymnasium, for example, it's really tricky. I shot a volleyball game one time, and I shot it with my 200 millimeter, okay? Now, my 200 millimeter lens happens to be a 2.8 lens, right? So I was able to set my aperture at 2.8, but I had to make sure that my shutter speed was over 200 to be able to be greater than the focal length of the thing, right? Obviously, I wanted to get my goal was to get 500. Like I said, the minimum shutter speed, even if you're indoors, should be try to get 500, right? So in order for me to, I was indoors in a gymnasium, in order for me to get a shutter speed of 2.8, I'm sorry, in order for me to get a shutter speed of 500, I had to set the camera's aperture to 2.8. Okay, in order to do that, I literally had to get an ISO of about 5,000 because it was so dark in the gymnasium. Okay, I was trying to keep it at 3,200. Luckily, my camera can handle those kind of ISOs, but I wanted to get 500. So the first thing that I could do is open up my aperture as much as I could with that lens, which was 2.8, and I still had to go to either 3,200 or 5,000 in order for me to achieve that 500 shutter speed, okay, the ISO. And the reason being is because it's so dark in there, and I need that shutter speed to be able to freeze the action, okay? And it's very, very challenging because it's harder. It's just that there's not enough light. And if you go any lower than that, you're not gonna freeze that action, going over, a volleyball or whatever. Some of the photos you guys have seen in the past where they go with the ball in the front, remember that? That was shot that day. Unfortunately, I don't have that with me here, but and so that's the trick, okay? So you wanna achieve at least 500. Mine is you have to get at least 500 shutter speed to freeze the action if you're gonna be indoors. You could go lower, you could go 250, I guess, but you're gonna get some blurriness if it does some really fast action. So 500 is probably gonna freeze most action, but just know that you're gonna have to open up your aperture as much as you can, and then put up your ISO enough to be able to get that shutter speed for you to be properly exposed. This is where it comes into play, where you need to invest in a good fast lens. Because your 3.5, which becomes a 5.6 when you zoom out, in other words, your kit lens, it's never gonna work in this situation. Because remember, you have to be zoomed out, right, to get close to the action. And what happens when you get zoomed out? You can only get 5.6. And there's no way you're gonna be able to get near that. I don't care how high you put your ISO, if it's a gymnasium, for you to get that kind of shutter speed in that area. Okay? Questions? Probably confused.
Yeah, it's a little confusing,
But tell me which part.
so when you're shooting a 200 millimeter, 2.8, then your shutter speed is gonna be 5,000?
No,
400.
500.
Like,
We're only talking about this if you get into challenging situations that are indoors, where the light is low. When it's nighttime, the light is low. But if you're outdoors, you can probably get any one of these others. Okay.
Does it matter what time of the day it is? I mean,
Well, I
an
mean,
overcast day?
if it's cloudy and
It's then your rating, you know?
obviously, no, I'm talking about a sunny day.
Okay.
Because remember,
I
sun,
mean, they play football in crappy weather.
right, exactly. That's when you get challenged. That's when you need a good lens.
Okay.
I'm just talking about, just remember, that the best, easiest way to remember that is light equals shutter speed. The more light, the higher the shutter speed. If you were to set your camera on automatic mode and let it meter the light, you would see the difference. You will see, if you point it somewhere where it's really, really lit up, you'll get a high shutter speed. You put it this way where it's not so lit up, you'll see a lower shutter speed. The camera's meter will tell you how much light is there. Okay? But the easiest way to do that is you just go out in the middle of a day, on a sunny day, and go do some, find out when there's some kids playing soccer, for example, and they'll be able to tell you. I mean, you'll be able to kind of work out. If you know somebody who has a kid, say, hey, does your kid play soccer? Can I go shoot him?
There you go. So you can still get like good shots of sports even with the kit lens?
Yes, because when it comes to a kit lens, you're not really worried about having a wide open aperture. You're more concerned with shutter speed. So obviously you can get the shutter speed with any lens. So the only time that a fast lens comes into play is if you're trying to capture the action in a dimly lit room like a gymnasium, for example. But if you're outdoors and you're talking about doing shutter speed, yeah, you can do it with any lens. That doesn't really, you don't have to have a special lens for that. It does help because you do have better glass inside a fast lens, which allows you to capture better, sharper images. But you can still do it with a kit lens. When I first started out, I would go do a lot of sports with just a kit lens. So the only difference is they may not be as vivid, may not be as sharp, but you can still do it. You can capture. I don't know what you have to really look at is what is the capability of your camera as far as capturing shutter speed. Like I said, mine will go up to 8,000. Some will go up to 5,000 or whatever. But you really only need between 500 and 2,000 anyway. You can capture that with any camera. Okay.
On the video you just showed us, they showed the multiple focus points. How does that come into play?
Okay, so the focal points, really, a lot of cameras have different multitude focal points, okay? And you can either let the camera find this focal point by depressing the shutter button halfway down. And what's gonna happen is you push the button halfway down, it's gonna throw out little red dots telling you where the focal points are. You can let the camera do it, or you can manually do it yourself. And there's a toggle switch behind the camera that allows you to move your focal points. If you want to be very specific as to where you land your focal point, which is why I really suggest if you're doing portraits, for example, because portraits you want to get them on the face, get them on the eye closest to the camera. So you might want to do it manually, toggle your focal point till you get that red dot right on the eye. Okay? Or you can just let the camera, some have multiple, some have as little as 9 focal points, some have as 54 focal points, 49 focal points, whatever. Every camera's a little bit different, so. The question is, do I do any editing afterwards? Yes, you have to. I do, but I like to think that I do most of I can try to get everything right in camera to begin with, so that I do very little after. But you do have to do some post-processing with any image, especially in the digital world. When an image comes out of a digital camera, it's not ready for anything, it's not really ready for print or even for web. At the very least, it needs to be sharpened, okay? But what I want to do with my images, I basically just adjust the levels, that means the exposure, to make sure that the exposure is correct, to make sure that it's not, we've talked about the histogram in the past, I look at the histogram to make sure that it's not either over or underexposed, I get that in the middle. Once I do that, I do a little bit of contrast, and then, once I'm satisfied with it, then I'll sharpen it, okay? And I'll show you guys, I'll have a class on that one of these days. I just got new Photoshop on my computer, so I'll be able to show you guys the latest and the greatest. But yes, you have to. I don't care how good of a camera you have, you're gonna need at least a little bit of manipulation. If nothing else, you need to sharpen your images. Now, there's some people that say, "Oh, it's okay. I'll just fix it later in Photoshop." Okay, I'm not that kind of a guy. I'm kind of lazy when it comes to be sitting in front of the computer. I'd rather try to do everything in camera. This is why I was telling you guys to try to get your exposure properly in camera, so that you have very little to do later on in post processing. The less you do, the better. Some people spend way too much time trying to fix images that are not good to begin with. That's not what you want to do. An image. Once an image is out of focus, for example, I don't care what you do, it's still going to be out of focus. It may be sharply out of focus, but it's still going to be out of focus. So you got to get it in camera right. When I went to photography school, that's one of the things that I learned from some of the experienced photographers is try to get all your exposure proper in camera so that you don't have to worry about it later. Once an image is ruined, if you don't get it right, there's no fixing it. You're just gonna have to throw it away, okay? If nobody has any more questions, I guess we'll see you guys next week. So what would you guys like to discuss next?
Well,
We
not next
did night
week.
photography, we did sports photography today.
Next week will be the third, we're not meeting the third.
Well, right, well,
Two
the
weeks.
next time we meet.
Next time, okay.
Anybody have any suggestions?
The shutter speed with the aperture
I
already.
know cops don't come when you have an accident anymore. Is there any tips for taking good post-accident photography?
Yeah, I guess we can talk about that as well.
I don't know.
No, actually, I think we're gonna talk about composition next week.
Yeah.
Good.
Because that seems to be something that she needs to work on, she said. So if you guys recognize something that you need, let me know.
That'd be great.
And our next class is January 10th.
January 10th.
Same time, same place, and we'll see you guys there.
So it's at 5 o'clock then?
Right. Okay, see you then.